4-week special that's associated with our lifestyle challenge that's ongoing. So we got the Facebook page, the YouTube page with our daily challenges, and these series of weekly videos are meant to kind of build upon and kind of enhance your ability to take advantage of the challenges that we're posting and help you make successful choices going forward. So if you remember in our first week, we talked about the idea of having that consistency, having that plan. So you're showing up, the implementation intention. So knowing exactly when and where it's going to happen, putting the time in your schedule so you're able to be consistent. And then the beliefs, right? And then in the second week, we kind of built up on those beliefs a little bit. We talked about some fears, some self-limiting beliefs that might hold you back from being successful. And so today I want to kind of dive in again to one of those components we talked about in the first week and just give you a little bit more detail. And this is the idea of consistency. We talked last week about the self-limiting beliefs, the fears, and that's kind of on a more big picture, right? Higher level. We talked about kind of stepping back, reflecting on when those fears or those self-limiting beliefs come up, and kind of some strategies you could use to get a better understanding of how those negative emotions were affecting your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs, etc. I want to get a little bit more granular today. I want to kind of bring it down to the surface level and talk with you about the idea of the gains versus the gap. Now, this is an idea that I did not come up with. It was developed by a wonderfully intelligent man named Dan Sullivan. He's the founder of Strategic Coach, which is a coaching program for not all small business, but entrepreneurs, and just really, really incredible. And so his idea is that the attitude that you take influences the world. And it's actually really incredible. In his book, he talks about, there's a couple different studies where he shows that somebody's perception of what they're doing has a profound impact on literally how their body physically adapts to the stimulus. So I've got two examples for you. The first one is a group of housekeepers at a small hotel. And so obviously you can imagine as a housekeeper, they're relatively physical, right? They're going around, they're cleaning, they're scrubbing, they're picking up garbage, all these different things. And so they had two groups, a control group that just kind of came in, they got fed lunch and they said, you're doing a good job and keep at it. And the second group, the intervention group, had the lunch, but they also had a speaker come in and share with them how beneficial their job was for their overall health and well-being, because they're being physically active every day at work. So they're getting steps, they're burning calories. And the work that they were doing was considered, light to moderate physical activity, which is good for them. By the end of their day, they'd gotten their requirements for the week just from doing their job. And then they followed up with them a few weeks later, and all kinds of different measures as far as blood pressure and various different results came back and showed that they'd actually decreased in the group that perceived that what they were doing was physical activity. So their job didn't change. Nothing about their day-to-day activity level changed in any meaningful way compared to the control group. Just whether or not they believed that it was beneficial, the work they were doing for their health and well-being actually had a profound impact. Now here's another one. This one's even crazier because there's blood markers to go with this. So the first one was just kind of feedback. Obviously they did a few things like blood pressure and resting heart rate and things like that, but for the most part it was people's perception of what they thought. This one is really cool because it's two different groups that get the same milkshake. So we've got a milkshake, really delicious, really tasty, 620 calories was what one group was told was in it, and the other group was told it was 120 calories. So one was explained that it was an indulgent milkshake, very high in fat, very tasty, very good. Other 120 calories, very sensible milkshake. It was filled with nutrients and all kinds of healthy things. Turns out that both of the shakes only had 380 calories in them. So from one, it was really, really overrepresented, and two, it was kind of underrepresented. Neither of them were actually the truth. And now there's a peptide, a hormone in your gut called ghrelin, and when that's really high, you're hungry, and when it's really low, you feel full. And so the people that had the really fatty, or what they were told was a really fatty indulgent milkshake, they did their blood levels before, during, after, and then like 2 hours after, and they actually had less ghrelin. Like they didn't perceive themselves as being hungry, but they also, when they did their blood measures, they had less hungry hormones in their blood because they thought they had a really fatty filling shake. And then the opposite was true for the group that drank the sensible milkshake. They had more ghrelin, so they felt more hungry because they had this sensible low calorie smoothie shake. It turns out they were exactly the same. There was no caloric difference or ingredient difference between the two shakes. The two groups had the exact same shape, but the one group actually had less of a hormone in their body, and the other group actually had more of a hormone in their body, just because of the perception of what it was they were eating. So where does this come into play? Every single day, life happens, right? Things happen, and sometimes we perceive them as good, and sometimes we perceive them as bad. And so the idea of the gain versus the gap is anytime you get yourself stuck in a rut of a negative emotion, you keep reaffirming to yourself that whatever happened to you was bad, that it was frustrating, that it wasn't good, then you're in that rut. And again, another study that shows that called psychological flexibility. So if you're willing to be able to adapt to what's happening and kind of being able to reframe it. So instead of saying, for example, you get a flat tire. When you walk out of the house in the morning, get into your car, the tire's flat. And instead of being like, I'm so angry, I'm so frustrated, my tire's flat, what the heck am I going to do? You could take the Uber into work or call a taxi or walk, depending on where you live, and then be super grateful. Man, I'm so glad that tire was flat when I got up in the morning instead of blowing the tire on the highway into work. How much more safe was I because it was flat in the driveway, right? So you reframed it. And, they're both true, right? If you're really frustrated that your tire was flat, absolutely. It's super frustrating that your tire was flat. And if you reframe it and say, hey, so great that didn't happen while I was driving, that's also true, right? Neither of them are any more or less true than the other because they're both your perception of what happened. The fact is just that there was a flat tire. Any emotional or thought that you tie to the event is your interpretation of what happened. And so if you are somebody that's psychologically flexible and you're able to do that, you're able to reframe a negative event and make it a positive, it's called being psychologically flexible. Now, again, I got one more story for you, or one more study for you. And this is just so amazing because there's science to back this up. It's not just a man's or a woman's opinion of what it is. It's actual science that backs up what we're talking about here. And so people that with low psychological flexibility, so they're not able to kind of reframe what's going on, they're more likely to be anxious, depressed, poor work performance, less ability to learn, more likely to have substance abuse, lower quality of life, higher likelihood of depression, more sensitive to being long-term disability, more likely to worry. All of these things that come from not being able to stop and reframe, right? And so a lot of this, obviously negative events is the perfect example there with the flat tire. That's a great example of that psychological flexibility and being able to turn things around. But the main reason why I wanted to bring this up specifically for us today in this group where we're goal setting, we're talking about lifestyle change, and we're talking about kind of making improvements, is that this also gets us into trouble when we're always looking forward, right? We have this ideal. We're really good at humans is imagining our future. So, the lifestyle challenge starts. The lifestyle challenge starts, and you think to yourself, great, I'm going to lose 5 pounds, or I'm going to start being more active, or I'm going to eat more vegetables. And then you've got this vision in your head of you in the future, 30 days from now, where you're eating kale for lunch every day, and you're, walking around the block every night when you get home from work, and you've got rippling 6-pack abs when you stand in the mirror, all these things. And so when the challenge is over, if you don't measure up to that ideal, how do you feel? Not very good, right? And again, this is kind of that psychological flexibility. There's a trick here to this. Instead of measuring yourself forward against your ideal, because let's face it, even if you check all of those boxes and you're eating kale for lunch and you're walking around the block and you have a 6-pack ab, all of a sudden maybe you see somebody on your Instagram page that's got an awesome tan and it's the middle of February in Canada, so you don't have a tan. So, man, I need that tan. Or all of a sudden this fit person that eats really well is driving a fancy car and you're like, I just got this Honda Civic. That's not me. I could have that. Point being, there's always going to be more. When you compare yourself to others, when you compare yourself to your ideal future, there's always going to be more. We're always kind of programmed to think ahead and dream and envision for more. It's challenging us to grow and expand. And that's such a positive thing when it's chosen to be a positive adaptation, right? When you use it in that sense to inspire you to keep going forward. When it gets to be a problem is when it actually makes you feel bad about yourself. And so this is called hedonic adaptation, where you never have enough and you're always needing other things because you're not satisfied with where you are right now. And this is the idea of the gap versus the gain. If you're always comparing yourself to this ideal in the future, you're always in the gap. You're always in this psychological inflexibility. You're always looking on the negative side. You're never living up to your ideals. You're never good enough. You're never in a place where you're satisfied with what you have. So the trick, the mindset, and again, you can do it just in your head. It doesn't need to be written down on paper, but it is a cool idea to sit down and journal at the end of the day and reflect on this, is to look backwards on where you've come. So we can go back just as simple as 90 days, or in the sake of this challenge, 30 days, and what you've accomplished. If you had never had kale before and you ate kale 5 times, amazing. That's so cool. You tried kale 5 times and you've never had it before. How amazing is that? Or you never found the time to get out for a walk and you went 15 times over the course of the month. You got out and got for a walk after work. Amazing. How cool is that? You hadn't done it before. Now you've been doing it. There's something there to celebrate. You were more successful now than you had been when you started. And that's the gain. Flipping the script, looking backwards and always seeing how far you've come. Because let's face it, we all make progress every single day. That's what we do as humans, right? We're always working towards these ideals. The difference is how you feel about it. Is it a need? Is it something in the future that you need to have that's causing you stress and anxiety and guilt because you don't have it? Or is it a want? Is it something that's motivating you, inspiring you to get up and work for it? And a lot of times the difference is, that anxiety, that stress, or gratitude and positivity. And that in order to be gracious and to feel positive, a lot of times it's just flipping the script and looking back at the success that you've already had, celebrating the wins that have already happened versus holding yourself accountable for things, the ideals that you haven't accomplished yet. So you can think about going back as far as 10 years, as far as 3 years, as far as 1 year. If you look back 10 years ago, chances are you've done a ton of amazing things. You go back 3 years ago, 1 year ago, 90 days, it doesn't matter. You've accomplished something. There's something there that you can celebrate. Chances are it's something really amazing, very positive, and very powerful. And so that is the idea of the gains versus the gap, is having the psychological flexibility to flip the script and always look on the positive side. And the easiest way to do that is just to look backwards from where you've come to where you've been now, and not to focus on the ideal other than as inspiration for what's coming in the future. So when you have these ideals about eating healthier and being more active, that motivates you to get up and work, great. But when you're looking to hold yourself accountable to something, look back on where you've been. How much have you accomplished since you started this challenge? And make sure that you reward yourself and encourage yourself and acknowledge the success that you've had thus far already and all the way through the challenge, versus holding yourself accountable to some ideal that you didn't hit. Right now, sometimes in the business world, we do need to actually hit certain milestones, certain targets. So it can't always be all rainbows and butterflies, but regardless, there's at least a lesson to learn, right? If there's something important you had to do and you failed to hit it, then there's a reason why, and there's a lesson there to learn. And when you're willing to take that as a lesson, as an opportunity for growth, so you're more likely to be successful in the future, that in and of itself can be a positive thing versus beating yourself up for not being successful. So in every opportunity, there is always the opportunity to look at the gain instead of the gap. Choice is 100% yours. And as I shared with you at the very beginning of this talk, your ability to perceive it as either a positive or a negative actually has an impact on biologically how your body responds. You live longer, you're happier, you have less of certain stress hormones in your body just based on how you perceive an event. The fact of what actually happens doesn't have as much of an impact on your body as how you perceive it. So now that you have that information, I challenge you to go out there and catch yourself every time you're in the gap, because there's never going to be a time when you don't feel down, when you don't feel frustrated, when you don't feel discouraged. But how much psychological flexibility can you develop in yourself to flip that around and find the gain instead of always focusing on the gap? Okay, so that's it. I'm off my soapbox, off again until next week. Next week is the very last week, and this is one that's near and dear to my heart. We're going to be talking about play next week and how to make sure that you're having fun while you're setting up your different habits and goals that you're setting for yourself in the lifestyle challenge. So have a good week, everyone. We'll see you back here, same time, same place, 2:00 every Wednesday for our live video. And feel free to leave a comment below. When's an opportunity that you've reframed a gap and made it into a